great. Thanks to all the panelists. Really a great group of panelists for this topic. I have some all the questions that have been asked in the chat. I've added into my list, alternating between questions I had and ones that were just asked. So the first question I have is for Sharon from the NJDEP. There's an expression I've heard a lot that data is really what drives decisions for local and state government. Currently, the NJDEP has 24 to 30 air monitoring sites across the state, depending on the season. And this data is used to create reports, in part like the great report we learned about from the American Lung Association tonight. My question specifically, are there enough sites in New Jersey, and do we have enough data to accurately reflect the on-the-ground conditions in New Jersey, particularly in overburdened communities?
Yeah, thanks for that question. So I do work closely with the Bureau of Air Monitoring, and the way that but I'm not a monitoring expert. So what I got to say is limiting factor is always funding, but also when they look to site monitors, they look to find the area that has the highest concentrations. And so that's why you'll see different monitors for ozone and different monitors for PM 2.5. The locations of where the largest concentration might be is different for each. Ozone is very meteorologically influenced. Transport is a big part of it. And so Camden, like they had said, Burlington doesn't have a monitor. In fact, Burlington used to have a monitor and it was measuring so low for many, many years. They just said, there's no reason to run it anymore. And then you do have the ability to do that. You do have the ability to take monitors down. And so that's why there isn't a monitor in Burlington anymore. It was measuring so low, it didn't make sense to run it and use money to run it anymore. But Camden, you can understand why there's a monitor there. And we have monitors in a lot of environmental justice communities. We have monitors in Camden, Jersey City, Trenton, Elizabeth, Newark. And so I think they are represented, and they are represented for many reasons. And I'll use Camden is major roadway. It has industrial sources. It's right across from Philadelphia. And we have also done a lot of effort, even the statistical analysis, looking at whether the monitors that we have and saying, are they really sited in the right places? So we do check that it is something, and Lewis will say, do you want another one somewhere else? And we'll kind of talk about it. So what I want to tell the public is you have the opportunity to take a look at the department's network, because every year they go out with an annual network plan, and it is publicly noticed to the public to review and comment. And that's 30 days. It's typically at the end of May, the beginning of June, because they do have to submit it to EPA. So there is an opportunity for you to weigh in on that and take a look at that. And I'll just give one quick example. The department thought, so I'll just use like SO2. In the north, we had a very large coal power plant across the Delaware River, very close to New Jersey. And our director at the time said, I bet there's a SO2 problem there. And he cited a monitor, and immediately the spike went up. So when you look at our monitoring data and you see a big, huge spike, that's because that monitor was finally in place and it was measuring from this out-of-state source. And we took action against that out-of-state source. And I think they had to shut down in 2014, 2015, and now you'll see it's down to 0. So when we do see there is a need for air quality, we will take action. And it does take a lot to site monitors, so I will say that. But I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you very much for that thorough answer. I appreciate it. We did have a question come in asking about Burlington County, but I believe the question has been answered. So I'm going to move on to the next audience question. I think I'll direct this towards Kevin. And this was from the chat. What studies are available or being done to address the impact of COVID-19? That was
yeah, there's a lot of work, of course, in progress on COVID-19 in all sorts of ways. Relative to this particular issue, I mean, even fairly early in the pandemic last year, the Harvard Chan School folks did come out with some even very preliminary information that clearly showed that people who had long-term exposure to fine particles were, at higher levels, were then more likely to die from COVID-19. As this association was clearly there. The mechanisms, of course, and the causation issues are still under work. But at the same time, this is the kind of thing where it takes normally a long time to do this kind of research. But this is no surprise. We've known there's lots of literature already that demonstrates that air pollutants do predispose people to more adverse consequences from health problems, but specifically more adverse consequences from infectious agents. And we've seen that kind of thing and again in the past, even prior to the COVID-19 issue. So. But we do have, at our own website, lung.org /COVID-19, you can find information there about how we're informing the public on different issues there. But certainly, if there are some research ideas, there are lots of opportunities available, and lung associations interested in hearing about.
That's great. Thank you. I believe we have a question that was submitted by Jeremiah. Jeremiah, would you like to read out your question?
Yes. Okay. So the question I asked, I think prior to the meeting for the panel, I'm more focused on as far as what we can do at home. So what can we do at home individually or as a community to improve air quality where we live and offset any pollutants? And also, what are some practices that improve it? And what are some bad habits that we need to correct, like as homeowners, renters, like that? That's what I'm looking at.
I'll go first. I think your vehicle is the biggest bang for your buck. It's hitting climate, it's hitting ozone, particulate matter, and volatile organic compounds, toxic pollutants. So anything you can do, I always say, just if you can purchase the cleanest car that you can afford, you should do that. And idling is just turn your car off. Cars, I know in the past, there's this concept that it'll ruin your starter. It's not going to ruin your starter. There's no need to idle. For me, I always put out a notice to my community when school starts, parents, please don't idle by the bus stop. That's right where the kids are breathing. So that is something. I think there's electric lawn equipment, if you can afford that. Those little sources, those two-cycle engines can be pretty dirty with particulate matter. So I think idling is a bad habit in my opinion. No offense, but yeah. So I think those would be, to me, the really big ticket items.
Great, thanks for that. I have a prepared question. I think I'll direct this one towards. Oh, thank you. Towards Doug. Besides taking personal steps to protect yourself from poor air quality inside and outside your home, many New Jersey residents want to be proactive in holding local polluters in and around their communities accountable for fugitive emissions. There's great things like the Warren DEP hotline, but many residents on the ground are really not aware of some of these tools. My question for Doug, how do you recommend that local, state, and federal agencies can better inform residents about how to report environmental issues in their communities?
Yeah, so that's a great question, Ben, because that gets at, actually an initiative that the Acting Attorney General, Andrew Bruck, just launched when he came into office. And that was something you and Sean referenced about the importance of Tri-County, right, which is illegal dumping is something we can see. It shouldn't happen. We should get rid of it, right? We saw legislative action through the Assembly Environment Committee. We saw the Attorney General do an enforcement strike just a few days ago. That's kind of the same mentality we should have for, illegal air pollution. I would argue it's, not only kind of publicizing, places like Warren DP and that kind of 911 ability, but to be looking at, the things that are right in front of our face. George Orwell famously said that the hardest thing to see is at the tip of your nose. And I just wanted, again, to credit, this organization and many others for the organizing and advocacy targeting Covanta and the Covanta Camden incinerator. That microgrid obviously should not be directly tied to the incinerator. But if you want to kind of talk about an air quality issue and an environmental justice issue, the growth of incinerators in the 80s and 90s, which really was, true battle, right? And obviously, Mark Lobauer from Pennsauken can wax, I don't know if eloquently is the right word, but can certainly wax about those battles. The fact that we essentially have an incinerator in Camden's backyard and Waterfront South that's constantly emitting pollution night and day, that is a public health risk. There's no reason we should be, there's no reason we should be burning our trash right next to us. We should be moving towards zero waste future. We also need to, take away the ability for Covanta facilities to be subsidized by clean energy standards. So there's renewable energy credits that go to Covanta incinerators around the state. They wanted to get it even higher, right? But that's kind of a good example of something that might not be in all, and if you're not in Camden, it's not right in your backyard, but obviously that pollution impacts us. So I just wanted to kind of reference that as it's not a fugitive emission. You can see it, anytime you're on the Walt Whit, but that's something I think that's hugely important, and the importance of having people like Bill Moen and local assembly members, right? So obviously DEP is hugely important for enforcement process and the Title V air permits that DEP considers. That's hugely important. That is not exactly a user-friendly form, and some of us I know on this phone were involved in the Georgia Pacific gypsum plant, their air permit. There's too many facilities, and this gets at the environmental justice law. There are too many facilities that are targeted in urban communities. And the environmental justice law is really groundbreaking, but it's looking at permitting of new facilities. And we need to be doing both. We need to be looking at new facilities and not putting them in environmental justice communities. And we need to be looking at ratcheting down emissions in those communities right now. So I think I kind of went on a little bit of tangent of what you were saying, Ben, but I know, all of that's kind of near and dear to your heart and something that, all of us should be concerned about. So I guess the last thing I'll just say on this is, people like Bill Moen need to hear more that air quality and air pollution in our community is something that they need to do something about. In the same way that we need to target illegal dumping, we need to look at not only fugitive emissions, but what is allowed under permitting, and to work to ratchet that down, because that's ultimately the intent and the goal of the Clean Air Act.
Thank you, Doug. We have a pre-submitted question by Vicky next, if Vicky would like to ask that question.
Sure. Just great presentations, folks. Thank you. But I do have a question. And there was a lot of good news in what you presented, even though we still have a lot of work to do, clearly. But I have a question about the impacts of climate change in a little bit different way. As temperatures have been increasing, and there's no doubt that they have been, warmer, longer summers, as someone said, how does that counterbalance some of the improvements in emissions that you've been able to achieve? And I don't know, maybe Sharon, do you want to take that, or anybody?
Well, I'll jump in here. I'm sure Sharon has definitely thoughts on this, but this is one of the things that I meant to reference, and it's alarming, because the progress that we've seen on air pollution in many ways is going to be directly contradicted by the increase in temperatures. So recent research by Climate Central predicts the number of ozone alert days will double over the next 30 years because of rising temperatures. Now, that doesn't mean that we can't, that we're cooked, right? And I think that's the important thing to know on all this, is that, yes, climate change is going to impact us. It's going to impact our urban heat islands the most. It's going to exacerbate current inequities. But, we should use that as incentive to work to reduce pollutants as much as possible, because obviously every, million metric ton of carbon that we reduce is going to reduce the long-term impacts. So, it's important to acknowledge that climate change is going to trigger, more air pollutants because of higher temperatures. But also at the same time, we've seen a lot of progress in that graph that Sharon was presenting. And from the 90s on down, we've seen dramatic decreases. There's no reason why we can't accelerate that.
Yeah, and
I'd like to add, oh, good, Sharon.
I'll be quick. I agree with Doug that climate change, you can expect that ozone will increase. However, and so my involvement has been just sort of like seeing what the climate group and the Global Warming Response Act has said. And so it's really kind of looking forward and saying, but the actions we're taking will help to offset it. So the electric vehicle initiative that Doug is working with Peg Hanna at the DEP on, we sort of recognize that there will be an impact, but New Jersey's now acting on that to sort of offset it because it is looking ahead on any number of ways. So I'm sorry, go ahead, Kevin.
Yeah, I mean, sure, and there's a lot to be said here. I think there's certainly the idea that we know air pollution episodes, there's a certain randomness to them. We know that, there's a certain issue about whether it's a hot and sunny summer or if it's a cooler and wetter one. The recent event that we had where forest fires in the West polluted our air, that required, a number of things to happen in the atmosphere to get that smoke into our noses and lungs. At the same time, what we've seen is that on the long term, there is this potential that's already showing up in some of the data. I can show you some graphs if you want, some trend graphs where the ozone numbers sort of maybe had their best years, 5 or so years ago, and now the graph seems to be tipping upward. I know that there's certainly some areas with particle pollution where, these are bad air days. We're going to count them in our report when that gets validated data. So they're going to add to the grade. So the idea is that it's going to take some time to do the kinds of transition, to do the electric vehicle work, to do the trucking work, to get the renewable and cleaner energy sources online. So don't expect the changes to happen overnight. It's going to take some time before these upturns that we're already seeing are sort of through the system, and it may take a long time because the whole issue about greenhouse gases is that they have such long residence times in the atmosphere that a lot of this is baked in. It's going to be a struggle, but we have to do the best we can and be optimistic that we can achieve things.
Thank you all for those great answers. I have a prepared question for Sharon. It's a little bit long. I'll try to read it quickly. Mobile air pollution sources, such as those from commercial trucking, airports, container ships, are often cited as some of the largest contributors to regional air pollution, as measured by things like the National Ambient Air Quality Standards. That being said, many urban communities in New Jersey also experience air pollution from stationary sources, such as power plants, trash incinerators, and other industry, that causes unique quality of life and health impacts. My question for Sharon, how is addressing the impacts of mobile versus stationary air pollution prioritized by New Jersey state government? Are national ambient air quality standards the biggest driver in regulating and enforcing air permits and emissions? Or is a more holistic approach used that considers psychosocial impacts and other health impacts of living near stationary sources?
So as far as the air program goes, our job is prescribed by the Clean Air Act. And so we develop the state implementation plans, we develop the rules and move forward. So it is driven by emissions. It is driven by looking ahead and seeing if the rules and regulations, how will that impact our future air quality by like a prescribed attainment date. So I will say that. But we are aware that when you do live in a community that is heavily industrialized, we do realize that is going to create an overburden area. And so we track the pollution there. But as far as the air permits go, we don't have the ability to, at this point in time, affect where those industry goes. And I think at the community level, you do, if it's something that you can engage your community with to work on where those industry get cited. But as far as meeting the NACs, it is in emissions and recognizing sources and regulating them with air permits. Yeah.
Thank you. We have a audience question, Ed Cohen, if you'd like to ask it.
How much of the pollution in Camden County, in Camden, is from Philadelphia air pollution?
I'll defer to Sharon.
Yeah. I don't know off the top of my head. So we have done modeling a lot. A lot of it is. So I just don't know the numbers, but there are, so the EPA has done what they call transport modeling. And so what they look at is the contribution of PPB. Actually, a lot of ozone is background. So it's just naturally occurring. But there are certain monitors in South Jersey where pollution from Pennsylvania is more than the contribution from New Jersey. And so, and I can't say there's, New Jersey does pollute downwind as well into Connecticut and New York, but definitely, and Camden might be one of those monitors. If I could find the Excel spreadsheet, I could look it up for you. But definitely South Jersey does get a lot of pollution from Pennsylvania. And at some of those monitors, not just Camden, Pennsylvania contributes more than what New Jersey does in a PPB, so a perspective. Does that help answer your question? Okay.
Great. So I have like a toss-up question, a simple one. With all of this, it's kind of heavy topics, what are one or two things that make you optimistic about the future of air quality in New Jersey? Whoever wants to take that.
Well, I'll go. Certainly, yeah, and if anyone does take a look at the state of the air web pages and then goes to the trend graphs, you'll see lots of reasons to be optimistic, to show that, yeah, the Clean Air Act works. It is the most successful public health legislation in history. And the problem more recently has been, an abandonment of the act, not that the act doesn't work. We've seen that there are some things in it that we need to continue to support and make sure that they're strong. So for instance, the whole issue about setting air quality standards needs to follow the current science, not the current politics. And we also know, there are certainly the active front burnering of issues about environmental justice. I think in the recent past, it tended to be almost an afterthought. But now I think there is a much stronger sense that we need to deal with these issues. We need to deal with them in the context of climate change, and that this is a societal thing that we need to address. I think our attitudes are coming around. Better later than never, but at the same time, it's important that that things are changing, and I think there's a lot of ways that people can look for to support those changes and address things, because even if the current laws don't allow Sharon or DEP to do certain things with respect to environmental justice situations, the laws are only good as the ethics behind those that establish the law. And I think if we pay attention to what really needs to be done to be critical, we can make good changes that will help address the issues. I know that Doug pointed out about the need to address those highest risk zones. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. And I don't know how much time we have, but I will defer to Sean to cut me off at the appropriate time. But I do have another audience question from June, if she'd like to ask it.
I had actually a couple of questions. One was in the chart about the EV conversion of mobile vehicles. I noticed that the tractor trailers seem to have been excluded to some degree from the standards. And I wondered why they have lower standards of transitioning to electric than other class 7 and 8 vehicles. And then I had a suggestion about the idling. First, I'll just turn that question over to you.
Yeah, so that's a great question, June. I mean, I think this is part of the transition, right? So to kind of answer before I answer this question, to answer the previous question, what makes me hopeful, right? 15 years ago, the head of the New Jersey Car Dealers Association, fighting us on clean cars, rented an electric golf cart and drove it around the State House and said, this is what you'll be driving if they pass clean cars. That same individual, who's my good friend Jim Appleton, now drives an electric car, a luxury vehicle, and he loves it. That just shows you how things change, right? Technology changes. You know, the fact that, you know, a decade ago, most people didn't have smartphones, right? You know, now everyone does, or feels like it at least. You know, that's a reminder that things are changing. In terms of the medium and heavy duty sector, you know, I had the privilege of visiting Los Angeles with some representatives from New Jersey EDA right before the pandemic struck. You know, they are literally getting electric trucks on the road in California right now. It's not just a mandate, they're there. That being said, tractor trailers are, you know, the larger the vehicle is, the harder it is to kind of electrify. So that's why it's a mandate, but there's just a distinction based on the vehicle class. Our experience with all technology is that as time goes by, it gets better and cheaper. And that's what we've seen in the electric vehicle space. We certainly expect to see that in the medium and heavy duty space. And then as Sharon was kind of referencing, right, the Clean Air Act is a guide star here, right? In this case, California California's clean air laws predate the Clean Air Act. That's why we can join California Clean Cars. That's why we can join Advanced Clean Truck. That allows us to get to a place that, you know, we can, you know, ratchet up or ratchet down those standards and increase them over time. So that's obviously what we're hoping to do here. And then just to address your idling question real quick, you know, I do think this is kind of public awareness, right? And as Sharon was referencing, literally just telling people, look, you know, the more you idle means more pollution you put in, especially if you're in a school zone. There is the 1877 Warn DEP. You know, unfortunately, there's not enough enforcement of this. But you know, there is a law, but if it's not enforced, it doesn't do as good. I've always appreciated Wawa putting out their signs saying the no idling zone. That's good. We need more enforcement, but also it's kind of a cultural thing, kind of the same way that we teach our kids to buckle their seatbelts. We should be teaching all of ourselves not to idle, you know, when we don't need to, which there's usually not a good reason. So let me end there.
And Doug's going to get the final word there. I'm going to turn it back over to Sean. Thank you to all of our panelists for taking those questions. Really, really interesting answers. Appreciate it.